guys, today I'm going to be showing you how to make these little Christmas trees. And I actually made it kind of like amigurumi, where I have polyfill in the center of these, but you absolutely do not need that. Even without it, because I used a smaller hook, it actually kept its shape even without it. So if you do not have polyfill, don't worry about that. You do not need it, and you can still make a tree that looks just like this. So you can see I kind of made each one a little bit different. They're both using the exact same pattern, which is the one that I show you in the video, but you can see on this one I brought in some different colors and kind of alternated the colors for the rounds, and on this one I did it all in green, but I added some beads just for decoration. And in terms of yarn, I will leave some information on screen in regards to the yarns that I used. I'm just going through some scrap yarns that I have, so I don't have the labels or anything to show you, but I will leave that information on screen. So if you'd like to get the same yarn as me, that's what I used. And you can see I made these into ornaments. So I had some ornament hooks that I got from Michael's, which I used on this one. But if you don't have that, I do show you in the video how to just kind of make a loop to use to hang on the tree. You also don't even need to make this into an ornament. They sit perfectly fine on their own. So if you would just like to use it as a table topper or to put on your fireplace, you do not need to make it into an ornament because they sit perfectly. So the beads that I used, which I got from Michael's, are these Christmas beads, and you don't need to get this exact set. You could just get some red and white beads or whatever color you would like, if you'd like to do the kind with the beads. These tree toppers also came in this set. They're actually beads that I just glued to the top. But again, you don't even need to use this. You could make a star for the top or whatever you would like for yours. So the beads are completely optional as well. You could do one like this without any bead at the top and just make a star or whatever you would like to do. And other than that, you will need a yarn needle to sew in some of your ends, although that process is easier, which you will see in the video. You will need a 3.75 millimeter crochet hook. You don't have to use this hook. If you'd like to have a bigger ornament, you can use a bigger hook, or if you'd like it to be smaller, you could use a smaller hook. Whatever works for you, but that's the size that I used. You will need a pair of scissors, and I also used a hot glue gun to glue on these beads, but again, that is not necessary. You could sew them on or whatever works for you. So a bunch of the materials are kind of, it depends on which way you'd like to build this up. But other than that, I think that's everything, and we'll get into making these super cute little Christmas trees. So to get started, we're going to start with a slip knot on our hook. And we're going to chain 30. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And when I have my chain of 30, I'll come back on and we'll go on to the next step together. All right, I have my chain of 30 ready to go here, and we're going to slip stitch to the first chain we created without twisting our chain. So just follow that down, making sure it's not twisted, and slip stitch to that first chain we made. Pull the yarn both through that chain and through the loop on our hook. And we're going to chain 3, 1, 2, and 3. And that chain of 3 counts as a double crochet. So at this point, we're going to double crochet into every chain around. So remember that chain of 3 counts as our first double crochet. So we'll move to that next stitch and do a double crochet. And I'm just going to double crochet into every single chain. And at the end of this round, you should have 30 double crochets because we started with a chain of 30. So once I've made my way around with double crochets and I'm back over at this side of the chain, I'll come back on. All right, I'm just at the end of round 1 and I have 30 double crochets all the way around. If you're ever confused about if that slip stitch there is a stitch, just go ahead and count your stitches and make sure that you have 30. That final little space there is actually the slip stitch from when we did our chain, and then we have our chain 3, which remember counted as a double crochet. So we're going to slip stitch into the top of that chain 3. And that's round 1 all complete. So again, we're going to chain 3, which counts as a double crochet. And for round 2, we want to have 4 double crochets in a row, and then we're going to do a double crochet decrease or a double crochet 2 together, whatever you'd like to call it. But instead of working through these stitches like normal, we're going to be working into the back loops only. And that's going to leave us a little loop that we'll later work through. So we just did our first one. We're going to do a double crochet into the next stitch, but again, working into that back loop only. So instead of going through the stitch like normal, we're just going to catch that back loop of the stitch and complete our double crochet. So there's 2 in a row, and we'll jump to the next stitch, back loop only, and complete our double crochet. That's 3 in a row, and 1 more. That's 4, and then over the next 2 stitches we're going to do our decrease. So to do that, we yarn over, go into the next stitch, but again that back loop only, and pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through those first 2 loops on your hook, yarn over, go into that next stitch, again just the back loop, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through those first 2 loops. You should have 3 loops on your hook. We're going to yarn over and pull through all 3 of those loops. And what we just did was made 2 double crochets into just 1. And that's going to be the pattern for round 2. It's a double crochet over the next 4 stitches in that back loop only. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then we decrease over the next 2 stitches. And I'm just going to repeat this all the way around. I'm at the end of round 2 and I just did my 4 double crochets in a row. So it works out that my final 2 stitches there will be a decrease. And that's how you know that you did this round correctly. It should end up being that those final 2 stitches you'll be decreasing over. And remember that next space there is the slip stitch from the previous round. So that's not actually a stitch. It'll be that little opening right below your chain 3. We just have those 2 stitches remaining. So I'll decrease over those 2 stitches. Again, working in that back loop only still. And I have 25 double crochets around at this point. And you can start to see those loops that we didn't work into, those front loops. Those will be the loops that we'll later be working into. So again, I'm going to slip stitch to the top of that chain 3, which was the first double crochet of round 2. I'm going to chain 3, which acts as a double crochet. And for this round, we want 3 double crochets in a row prior to our decrease. So there was the first one. We're going to jump to that next stitch, again working in those back loops only. So we're skipping that first space that the chain is coming out of, jumping to that next stitch, doing our double crochet. So we have 2 in a row, and we'll do 1 more, which gives us 3 double crochets in a row, and then we're going to decrease over the next 2 stitches. Again, we'll do 3 double crochets in a row. So there's 1 double crochet into the next stitch, 1 double crochet into the next stitch, and 1 double crochet into that next stitch. And then we will do our decrease over the next 2 stitches. And I'm going to repeat that pattern all the way around. All right, I'm just coming to the end of round 3 here. I have 2 stitches remaining. I just did my 3 double crochets in a row. So once again, I know I did this round correctly because it works out that my final 2 stitches will be a double crochet decrease. And you should have 20 double crochets at the end of this round. Again, we're skipping that slip stitch from the previous round and slip stitching to the top of that chain 3 or the first double crochet of the round. Again, I'm going to chain 3, which will be our first double crochet, and for round 4, we want 2 double crochets in a row prior to our decrease. So there's the first one. We skip that initial space, jump to the next available double crochet into that back loop only. We will do our second double crochet. So we have 2 in a row. So now we're going to decrease over the next 2 stitches. And we'll double crochet into the next 2 stitches. So there's 1 into the next stitch, 1 into the next stitch, and then we're going to decrease over the next 2 stitches. And that's the pattern for round 4. And at the end of this round, you should have 15 double crochets around. All right, I'm back where I started here. I just did my final double crochet decrease, and I'm going to slip stitch to the top of that chain 3, or the first double crochet of round 4. Again, I'm going to chain 3 for our first double crochet, and for round 5 it's just 1 double crochet into a stitch, and then we decrease over the next 2, and then 1 double crochet into the next stitch, and then decrease over the next 2. So I just did my first one and I'm going to decrease over the next 2 stitches. And I'm going to double crochet into the next stitch. And decrease over the next 2 stitches. So it's just 1 double crochet in between those double crochet decreases. And I'm going to repeat that pattern all the way around. You should have 10 double crochets at the end of this round, and I'll see you in just a moment. All right, I just finished my final decrease of round 5. Again, I'm going to slip stitch to that first double crochet of the round, or the top of that chain 3. And for our final round, we want to decrease all the way around. So to do that, I'm going to chain 2. I'm going to yarn over, go right back into that same stitch that I just slip stitched to, and pull up a loop and yarn over and pull through those first 2 loops. And then I'm going to yarn over and go into that next available stitch, again back loop only, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through those first 2 loops, and yarn over and pull through those 3 loops on your hook. And again, we're not doing any double crochets in between those decreases. So we'll jump to the next 2 available stitches and do our decrease over them. And it can get a little bit tricky at this point, but just kind of maneuver the tree however is easiest for you to hold it. And we're just going to decrease our way all the way around, and you should end up with 5 double crochets at the end of this round. So I'm just going to complete my final 2 decreases over those final 4 stitches, and when I've done that, I'll come back on and we'll go on together. Just finishing up my final decrease over these final 2 stitches, and again, it can be quite difficult on this final one, so I actually put my finger up through it just to kind of hold it a little bit easier, and you might have to kind of wiggle your hook around a little bit, just making sure to catch that back loop and complete your final decrease. So again, to go in that last one, you just kind of, actually I'm just going to move that tail right out of the way. There we go. Wiggle everything around until you catch that final loop and finish up your final decrease. So at this point, we're going to again slip stitch into the top of that first double crochet, and you can actually go through both loops on this because we're not going to be doing anything with those front loops on this final little space up here. So I'm going to slip stitch to that first double crochet that I made, and then we're going to fasten off. So again, I'm going to chain 1, cut my yarn, and pull that yarn through and pull tight to fasten off. And I'm going to weave this tail in and out of these 5 stitches at the top, just to close up this little opening right at the end there. So you can use your hook to do this, to kind of pull that strand in and out of these stitches, but I'm actually going to bring in my yarn needle and get the yarn attached to that. And I will go in through that stitch that I just slip stitched to and fastened off. So coming from the outside to the inside, I'm going to go back through that stitch. And then on the next stitch, going from the inside to the outside, I'm going to pull through the yarn through that stitch. And the next one will be from the outside to the inside. And the next one will be the inside to the outside. And that final stitch will be from the outside to the inside. And on this final stitch, I'm actually going to tie a knot just to make sure that this doesn't come undone. So I did pull it right through, and I'm going to pull tight, and that will close up any opening at the end there. But I'm going to go back through that same stitch, or just any stitch. This doesn't need to be perfect. I'm going to go right back through it, but hold a loop up. And I'm going to go through that loop, and this will tie a knot. And you don't have to do this part. You can just go ahead and after weaving it in through those 5 stitches, you can pull tight and then just sew in that end. Or what I'm going to do is just move that strand of yarn right to the center of the work. Because we will be filling the center with stuffing, or if you don't have any, even regardless of that, we're going to be closing up the bottom, so we won't see anything on the inside. So the good thing about this project is you can move all of your tails right to the middle and you'll never even know they're there. So it's a lot less sewing that you have to do, which is always nice. So at this point, we're going to work on those ruffles around the tree. So to do that, if you find all of these rounds of loops here, I'm going to turn the tree upside down. I'm going to find that bottom round of loops, and I'm going to insert my hook into that first loop to the left of the seam. So you can see the seam here. All I'm doing is inserting my hook to the left of that seam. And the reason we're working in this round, as opposed to working in the same direction we built up the tree, so attaching our hook to one of these loops and working in this direction, is when you put the stitches down after completing the round, you'll be looking at the wrong side of them. So just for a neater look, we want to work in this direction, so when you push them down, we're looking at the right side of those stitches. I hope that makes sense. So we want to insert our hook into that first loop to the left of that seam, and I'm going to bring in my yarn. And you can attach your yarn in whichever way you feel most comfortable with. All I do is pull a loop through that loop, drop my tail, and chain 1. And if you pull on that tail, that will tighten up the chain, and you're all attached. And I'm going to go right back into that same stitch with a single crochet, like so. And we're going to skip the next loop. So that's that next available loop, but we're going to actually skip that loop, and into the next loop, we're going to do 5 double crochets into it. So I'm actually going to work over this tail. Feel free to do the same. Otherwise, if you don't want to do that, you can actually just move it right through to the center of the tree, like I was just talking about, because you'll never see those tails. But I'm just going to work over it just because that's what I'm used to doing. So again, we're going to skip that next loop, and into the next loop, we're going to do our 5 double crochets, which I'll call a shell for this pattern. So going right into that loop, we're going to do our shell or our 5 double crochets. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, all into that same loop. And again, we're going to skip the next loop. So not working into that next available loop. I'll push my tail out of the way at this point just so you can see it a little bit easier. But into that next loop, we're going to do a single crochet. And that's the pattern all the way around. We're going to skip the next available loop, so skip that loop, and into the next loop, we're going to do our shell or 5 double crochets into that same loop. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then we skip the next available loop, and into the next loop we do our single crochet. So I'm going to repeat that pattern all the way around. Skipping a loop, shell, skipping a loop, single crochet, skipping a loop, shell, skipping a loop, single crochet, and so on. And once I've made my way all the way around and I'm back over here close to where I started, I'll come back on and I'll show you how to work up the end here. All right, I'm just coming to the end of the round here. I just did one of my shells. I'm going to skip that next loop, and into the final loop, I'm going to single crochet. And I have 30 loops around on this round, so it doesn't work out that I have a shell prior to that single crochet. Once we slip stitch to that first single crochet of the round, it'll actually end up being that we have 2 singles right next to each other, but that's completely okay. Don't worry about that. It will still look great. Some of the rounds it will work out where we end in a shell and then a skip stitch prior to the single, so it works out good. But if that's not the case, don't worry about it. It will all look great. So again, I just completed that single crochet. I'm going to slip stitch, oops, to the first single crochet that I created. And I'm going to fasten off. So again, chain 1, cut your yarn, and pull that yarn through. And once again, you can kind of weave it underneath and then pull it through to the center so you don't have to sew in that end, but I will do that a little bit later. So you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these shells around. And each round that you go up, it will reduce the number of shells that you have by 1. So on this next one, we're going to do the same thing in that first loop right to, here's the seam here. It will look like a loop, but that's just the slip stitch from that round. So in the first loop to the left of that seam, I'm going to put my hook down into it. I'm going to pull up a loop with my yarn, drop my tail, and chain, whoops, chain 1. And when you pull that tail, that will close up that chain good. And again, I'm going to single crochet back into that loop. You can start with a shell. I'm going to start with a single crochet on each round. You can start with a shell and kind of alternate where the shells and the single crochets are sitting, but I'm just going to start with a single crochet on each round. So I'll go back into that stitch with a single crochet. And once again, I'm going to work my way around with that same pattern, and I'll work over this tail as I go. So we're going to skip that next available loop, and into the next loop we're going to do our shell. So 5 double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and we will skip that next loop, skip, and into the next loop we will do our single crochet and skip that next loop, and into the next loop we do our shell. And I'm just going to keep repeating this all the way around. Whoops. And all I'm going to do is repeat this pattern for each and every single round of those loops. I'll just finish up the shell here that I'm working on. There's 4 and 5. And I will skip that next loop and single into the next. And I'm just going to work my way around, and when I've made my way all the way around and I'm back where I started, no matter if I end on a shell or a single crochet or a skip stitch, it really doesn't matter. You're just going to slip stitch to that first single crochet that you made, and then you're going to fasten off, jump up a row, and do it on this row of loops. Fasten off, jump up a row, and so on. And again, you can do this in whatever color combination you think will work best. I'm just doing this all in green. And as you go, you're definitely going to, it's going to get trickier the higher you get. So you're going to kind of have to push the shells up or down or out of the way. Don't worry about ruining these. It doesn't matter where they're sitting right now, because afterwards we will push them all down and they stay down very nicely into place. So don't worry about having to move these around as you need to for it to not be in the way of that round that you're working on. So once I make my way up to this final round, I will come back on, and like I mentioned, each round you reduce the number of shells by 1. So I started with 7, and up here at the final one it should be 3 shells all the way around, but I'll come back for that round and show you how I do that one, and we'll go on to the next step together. All right, I'm coming to the end of my second last row. So I just did a single. I'm going to skip that next loop and into the final loop here. I'm going to do my shell. Two, 3, 4, and 5. And I actually don't have any more loops to skip, but that's okay. Like I've mentioned, we're just going to slip stitch into the first single crochet of the round, chain 1, cut our yarn, and pull that yarn through to fasten off. And now we'll be working on our final round. And once again, you can see mine is looking pretty messy too, but afterwards we'll get rid of all of these tails, and you can see I'll just do it quickly on the bottom one here. If you just move it down, it will all stay down. It's just up because kind of wiggling everything out of the way and moving them in the direction that makes it easier to be able to comfortably work around those stitches. So don't worry about that part at this point. So that last round is essentially the same. We will bring in our yarn into that loop to the left of the seam and drop our tail, chain one, and pull that tail to tighten. And it's definitely getting more and more difficult to hold at this point. We're going to go back into that same loop with a single crochet. Just as we've been doing, I'm going to work around the same here. I've been working over this tail, so I'll continue doing that. Skip that next loop, and we'll shell into that next. And on this round, and you'll see this a little bit clearer in just a second, there's not quite enough stitches to be able to do 3 of these shells. So I'll show you what I do in order to get my 3, because I do want 3 on this final round. 3, just finish up my shell. 4 and 5. And I will move that tail out of the way and skip that next loop and single crochet into that next one. And we skip that next one and shell into the next, which will be the second shell of this round. 2, 3, 4, and 5, like so. Skip that next loop and single crochet, which will actually be, oh no, we will have one more loop, which is actually the bottom loop of this final chain that we slip stitched into. Sometimes that one can get a little bit hidden, so you have to kind of pull it up. But so after that shell, I am skipping that next loop, single crocheting after the skipped loop, and then you can see we only have one more, which typically we would skip that loop and slip stitch to the first single crochet that we made, but I'm actually going to do a shell stitch into that just so I have 3 and not only 2 shells on the top. And if you can't find that loop, you could even do it into this slip stitch loop, whichever loop you find easiest to work into or wherever your hook will fit. Do one final shell into that just to make sure you have 3 on the top layer. So I'll finish working that up now. There's 2, 3, 4, and 5. And if you're comfortable with only 2 shells, that's fine too. It'll still look very nice. I just wanted it to work out that it's decreasing the number of shells on each round by 1. So we would need that 3rd one on the top round. And I will slip stitch to that first single crochet that I made. And at this point, oops, if I can get into that first stitch, there we go. Slip stitch to it, chain 1, cut my yarn, and pull that yarn through and pull tight. All right, at this point I'm going to go around and get all of my ends you can see you're always going to have the end from where you fastened off, and then you're going to have the other end from where you attached your yarn. If you worked over this yarn, you can just go ahead and cut it at this point because it will be sewn in, and I was working over that end. If you were not, you can do the same thing that I'm about to do with these ends where you fastened off, and that's just moving it right to the middle. So all I do is put my hook up through the center of the tree and kind of through any stitch that's just at the base of that final stitch, and I'm just going to pull that tail down into the center, and I'm going to go around and do that on every single one. And you can see it doesn't look great right now, it's kind of still popping up a little bit, but afterwards I'm going to tie the tails together, and I'll show you that in just a second, and it's actually going to push these shell stitches right down, and you can even go around and wiggle them all down at this point. But I'm just going to go around and get all of my tails into the center. I'll show you one more time. So jumping down to that next one, I will just bring my hook up into the center of the tree and just poke around till it comes out right below that stitch. Oops. Like so. And I will pull that tail right into the center and just let it be. No matter how it looks on this side, do not worry about that right now, because we will fix that up in just a moment. So I'm going to go around and just cut all the tails that I worked over. Here's one right here. So I can just cut that off at this point because I was actually working over it. If you were not, pull it through the center the same way. You would just go through the center and pull that tail into the middle, which you can actually do regardless if you don't feel like cutting them. I'll do that on this one. And yeah, just go around everywhere you fastened off, get that pulled into the center, and I'll show you what to do next. I'm just going to go into the center here, and if you look at all your tails, it'll be one tail from each row. So if you look, I just kind of half moved it inside out here, but if you just look, there will always be two tails that are kind of right next to each other because it's one from one row and then the next one from the row up, and then you have the third and the fourth row tails and so on. And you're going to tie those together in a knot. And I'm pulling quite tight. And I will actually double knot that. Like so. And I will go up to these next two. And if you're having troubles with this point, if you just look on the opposite side and kind of tug each, you can see the one I'm tugging on is that row, and the next one is that row right there. So I'm going to tie those two together. And I'm just going to work my way up and tie up each row to the row right above it. So I did those first two. Well, I actually just have these top ones, so I will do that right on camera. These remaining two tails, I'm going to double knot. And I, again, am pulling quite tight. Like so, and then I just have this tail from the very first row, which is already in the center, so I will just put that in. So that should be all of them. And again, I'm just going to stuff them all right in the middle because you will never see this part once the tree is created. So again, when you fold it right side out, you can just kind of push all of those layers down. I'm just going layer by layer and pushing them all downwards. So at this point, I just kind of shoved my thumb as far up as I could possibly get it into the center, and I'm just going to kind of push all of those different rounds down around my thumb, and that will kind of push them all in the right direction. So I'm pushing quite hard right now. Don't worry about ruining it again. And you can see that kind of pushed everything down. And at this point, we're going to go on to making the base of this tree that we will eventually sew around here, and you can add stuffing in there just to help it keep its shape, but again, you do not need to do that. So we'll move on to working up the base of the tree at this point. All right, to do the base, we're going to start with a slip knot on our same size hook. And I'm going to chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to do 9 double crochets into that first chain that I created. So if you skip those 3 chains, that will later act as the 10th double crochet. But into that first chain that you made, do 9 double crochets into it. So there's 1. And again, working in that exact same chain. 2, 3, and I'm just going to keep working my double crochets until I get to 9 in this first stitch. And once I have those complete, I will come back on. Right, I just finished my 9th double crochet into that first chain. And if you pull on your tail at this point, it will help close up that center opening a little bit more. And you can go ahead and actually use this tail to close up that center even more if you would like, but I think it's okay for me. But like I mentioned before, this chain 3 here counts as a double crochet. So you actually have 10 double crochets all the way around at this point. And we're going to slip stitch to the top of that chain 3. So there's 1, 2, 3, right at the top of that chain 3, which will be the first double crochet of the round. I'm going to slip stitch into it. Like so. And I'm going to chain 3, and that will count as our first double crochet of round 2. And for round 2, I want to do 2 double crochets into every single stitch around. So remember that chain 3 counts as a double crochet, so that will actually be the first one into this stitch. And we want to go right back into that same stitch that we just slip stitched into with our second double crochet. So there's 2 into the same stitch. And then I'm going to jump to my next stitch, and we're not working in the back loop only anymore. We're working through the stitch like normal. So into that next stitch, catching both those top loops on my hook, I will do my 2 double crochets. 1 and 2. And 2 into the next. And 2 double crochets into the next stitch. Both into that same stitch. And I'm going to repeat this around. Right, I just finished my final set of 2 double crochets of round 2, and you should have 20 double crochets all the way around. So if you have to, you can count back 20 to make sure you got that stitch count correctly. Again, keep in mind that next space is actually the slip stitch from the previous round. It's not actually a stitch. So it'll be that slip stitch and then your chain 3, which counted as the first double crochet of the round. So we're going to slip stitch into the top of that chain 3. And for our final round here, we're again going to chain 3, which will count as our first double crochet. And for this round, we want to do 1 double crochet in between increases. So what I mean by that is I just did my first double crochet, and we're going to move to that next stitch, so not that stitch we just slip stitched into where that chain is coming out of. We're going to move to the next one and do an increase. So that's 2 double crochets into the same stitch. There's 1 and 2. And then it will be just a double crochet into the next stitch and 2 double crochets into the next stitch. And that's the pattern for this round. It's 1 double crochet into the next stitch, 2 into the next, 1 into the next, 2 into the next, and so on. And once I'm all the way around and back at this side, I'll come back on and we'll go on to getting this all sewn to the bottom of our tree. Okay, I just finished my final increase there, so 2 double crochets into that final stitch. Once again, we skip over that slip stitch from the previous round. That is not a stitch, and we're going to slip stitch into the top of that chain 3. And it's very important that you have 30 double crochets around at this point, and that includes that chain 3 that counts as a double crochet. You have to make sure that it's 30, so make sure you go ahead and count, because otherwise it won't sew up evenly around the base because there's 30 stitches around here. So just make sure you have 30 at this point, and we're going to fasten off. So I will chain 1. And I'm going to cut a long tail that I'm going to use to sew. So just give yourself a good amount of length so you have enough to sew. And I will pull that all the way through that chain and pull tight. And at this point, you want to bring in your fluff that you're going to put into the center. If you don't have any, you can just skip this part and we'll go on to the sewing together, because as you can see, it's really actually not needed. It keeps its shape really nice because we used a small hook, so it's a little bit stiffer. But I'm going to bring in that fluff that I'm going to put into the center of the tree. All right, I have my big old bag of polyfill here. I can barely even get it into the camera view, but I'm just going to grab a handful of that, and I will get the bag out of the way here, and just little by little, I'm going to put it into the center. You don't need very much here. It fills up quite quick. So once it's kind of filled right to the top, when pushing it, it will start to come out a little bit, but don't worry about that because it's going to stay in there once we have that base sewn on. So I will bring that in. Actually, I'm just going to put this out of the way here for a second, and I'm going to attach my yarn needle to this long tail that we are going to use to sew. If I can get it through. Uh-oh, I'll try that again. There we go. Okay, and I will pull that through, and then we're going to place this on top with the right side facing out. So this is the wrong side of the work. I'm just going to kind of curl up that tail because again, that can go right into the middle. If you want your center to be closed up a little bit more, now is a good time to do that. But I'm just going to kind of put it right into the middle there. Place it on top with the right side facing out, like so. So it looks nice on the bottom. And I will start by coming back and going through that same stitch that we just slip stitched to. So coming from the outside to the inside, I'm going to go through that stitch and any stitch along the bottom here. So I just have these single loops to work through because when I worked my first round of double crochets, I actually worked over 2 loops. So I just have these single loops to work through, but you may have 2. Depending how you worked up your chain. But picking any loop, it doesn't matter where you start. I'm going to go through that loop as well and pull it through both those stitches and pull tight. And we have our first one attached. And then coming back, we're going to whip stitch. So coming back over here to this side, we'll go through that next stitch, both loops on my hook. There we go. Finding the next available stitch on the inside here and pulling the yarn through both of those stitches. And again, pull tight. So coming back over to this piece here, I move to that next available stitch, catching both those loops, the next available stitch over on the bottom of the tree, and pull through both. So I'm just going to work my way around whip stitching every single stitch together along the bottom here. Next stitch over on this circle we've created, making sure I have both those loops on my hook. Next stitch over here on the base of the tree and stitching it together. And we're constantly going to be working from the inside to the outside and then coming back, next stitch, inside to the outside, coming back, and so on. So I'll show you a couple more here. Stitch, next stitch available on this circle, next stitch on the base of the tree, and next stitch on the circle, and next stitch on the base of the tree. So I'll just keep working my way around, and as you go on, you're gonna kind of have to keep pushing that polyfill more and more into the center, but you can even see mine looks like it's spilling out a little bit, but once you've sewn your way all the way around, it will stay in there and look really nice. So I'm just going to keep working my way around, stitching the bottom to the base of the tree, and when I'm over on this side, I will come back on and we'll go on to the next step together. Just coming to the end here, I have one stitch left over on this side, one stitch left over on that side, and I will stitch those two together. And I'm going to come back through just kind of anywhere and do another knot. So I will pull that yarn through, but stick my thumb through to hold up a loop and then come back through that loop and pull tight, and that's made a knot. And even with this tail here, you don't actually have to sew it in. You can just kind of put it right into the center, just anywhere. You can come back down this way or right here. So I'll just kind of poke it through right where it's coming out of and poke it through to somewhere on the opposite side of the tree, right here. And I will pull that through and kind of pull it tight, and then I'm going to cut it. Oops. There we go. And it's gone into the center there. So because you pulled it tight, it will when you release it, it's going to be back into the center. If not, just kind of poke it back in with your yarn needle or your hook or whatever works best. But there we go. And you can kind of, if you had to push any of these out of the way to get that sewn in, you can kind of get them all back down, pushing up in the center. There we go. Perfect. That's looking good. And the bottom is looking super nice as well. And you can see, even though it looked like a lot of fluff, it still works perfect, and it will sit up nice and all of that kind of thing. So at this point, I'm going to bring in my beads that I have here. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I just got this little set at Michael's. You don't need to get a set that's for Christmas. They have tons and tons of beads there, so you could just get some white and red ones or any colors that you would like. And I'm going to just alternate at the end of each one of these shell stitches, the white and the red beads. So just going to show you, I'm going to put them right at the end of those shell stitches. So I have a glue gun here. Feel free to sew them in, or you could use fabric glue, whatever works best for you. You could even put pom-poms around it, anything you'd like, or you could just leave it exactly like this for a nice tree ornament. But I have my glue gun here that I will bring in. You can see it's very used, but it still works great. So, and I'm just going to put a little bit of glue just right at the end of one of the shells, just kind of right in the middle there. Just put a little dab, and I'll get that out of the way. And I will put my first bead, like so. And I'm just going to work around on every single shell here, right at the end. You can even put it directly on the bead, if that works better for you. I'm actually going to put it just directly on to the yarn here, but just right at the end. You can even go right in the middle, wherever you think it looks best. Little dab of glue, and I'll get all those strands cleaned up and put your bead down. And I'm putting the side that typically you would sew through on the side so you don't see it. You're just seeing the side of the bead that doesn't have a hole on it. So I'm just going to alternate these color of beads, placing them on every single one. Then I'll move up a row, and I'm going to do it right up to the top row there. And after I'm done that, I'll come back on. All right, I got all of my beads here attached with the glue. And at this point, I would like to hang this on my Christmas tree. So I'll show you how to do that with yarn. You can see, I'll just put that out of the way for a second. On the other one that I made here, I actually have these little ornament hooks that I used on that one. So I just kind of hooked it through a stitch on the back where it fit, and I tightened the bottom there. And I will use that hook to hang it on my Christmas tree. But if you do not have those, you can just use yarn. So you just want to kind of turn your tree around, see where you think it looks best in the front. And I'll have that facing towards me. And I'm going to bring in my yarn needle. And I have a piece of yarn here that when folded in half, it leaves me more than enough room to make a loop that I can hang on my Christmas tree. So I'm going to attach this yarn to my needle. Oops. Oh, it doesn't want to go through. There we go. So get that all attached, and you just want to, again with the side that you want facing or showing facing you, and you just want to put the needle through one of those spaces on the side. It doesn't need to be a specific stitch or anything like that, just kind of wherever it will fit, and through the opposite side. So I'm going through the entire 2 stitches on the top of the tree. There we go. And I will remove my yarn needle and make sure that the ends are the same size there, like so. And I'm just going to make a knot right at the end. So I'm making a knot with both of those strands, and then you can kind of wiggle the knot down to where you'd like it to sit, like so. And you can trim those ends. You can even trim them, I'll do it a little bit more. You can get right up to that knot if you'd like, whatever you think. And you have a way to hang this onto your Christmas tree. So at this point, I'm going to bring in my second little bead here that I'm going to place right on the top, so it looks like he's sitting on top of the Christmas tree. So I have him ready to go. I'm going to make sure not to get any glue on this strand of yarn, but I will kind of sit him right in the middle of the top, so he'll end up sitting between this loop when this ornament is hanging on the Christmas tree. So I'll get a little bit of glue on the bottom, like so, and I will just place him right on the top, and don't worry about those strands of glue that come out. They're actually really easy to get rid of. Afterwards I just kind of go around and pull it off, or I use my scissors to clean that all up. But there you go. He's sitting on top of the tree. And when you hang it on a branch, he'll be sitting right in the middle. So I think that turned out really nice. And I'll bring in my other ornament here. And I'm super happy with how these two turned out, and I hope that you guys are happy with how your tree turned out. And I really appreciate you watching, and I appreciate the support. And I will see you guys in my next video.